It's time for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson, and you're listening to Tony Graham, and I'm in Studio 2. Good afternoon, Matthew.
Yeah, good afternoon, Tony. I hope you finally got your lightsaber with you after you admitted this morning you're not a Star Wars fan, but it is still Star Wars Day, May the 4th.
Well, Matthew, I'm glad you're a fan of it.
There's probably a few other people as well, Tony.
Well, yes, I know that, but yes. All right, Luke Skywalker. Now, I do know a few things about it. You can't escape it, you know.
You can't escape it. That's exactly right.
Now, we've talked about prototype 3D house printing before, but over there in Dutchy land, they've unveiled a home 3D printed with concrete, and it wants to use the technology to house its growing population. So that's pretty clever, isn't it?
It is, and it's actually quite fascinating. We have talked about it before, you're quite right. And one of the ones we looked at before, again, was a prototype 3D printed house, and it did it all on site. So they set up the machinery, they 3D printed the house with concrete, and it took a few days to go through and do it all. The Netherlands has come up with a slightly different model where they're 3D printing in a factory and then moving those components to an area to actually build the house. But it involves, for example, in this particular house, 120 hours of printing, and there you go. You've got basically the house printed, and then it just needs to be assembled together and the roof put on. So if you have got an exploding population, like they have in the Netherlands, then being able to 3D print a house, being able to do it quickly, it conforms to all the regulations in the Netherlands. It basically, when you move in, it's quite an impressive house. And when you actually look at it, the way they print the 3D walls is kind of a back and forth motion with insulation in between those pockets. So people that are living in them, and there are people already living in them, are saying that the acoustic properties are quite impressive. It's a rough wall on the inside and the outside. You've got a large gap between the inside and the outside, so you get a very quiet house. So it sounds like quite a good solution. It sounds like a very quick solution to put one up. And the first one they built, which is the first of 5 they're building in this particular run of print runs, if you like, is in Eindhoven. And Eindhoven, I've actually been to Eindhoven. I've spoken at a conference there, and they were very proud in Eindhoven that they are, in their belief, the centre of innovation for the world. That might be a bit of a large claim, but they certainly do have a lot of innovation there, and this is another example of that type of innovation. Other countries are looking to how they can use 3D printing as well. India, for example, obviously huge amount of housing needed in India. Maybe they need some COVID-proof coating on their walls. I'm not sure at the moment, but obviously huge housing shortages in India, and they're looking to do some 3D printing of some houses, much smaller houses. We're talking about maybe 56 square metre houses, so quite small, but I imagine in some of the places people live now, a 56 square metre house would seem like an absolute mansion. So they're looking to do it in India, and I'm sure other countries as well.
I wonder how that will compare against the bricklaying machine. I think the Dutchies invented that too, didn't they?
I'm not sure who invented that one, but that's another one we have talked about as well, the bricklaying machine.
Yeah.
And so, look, it's great to see some people working on some innovative solutions to make house building. It's been done in a fairly traditional way for a lot of years to make it a little bit more efficient.
Absolutely. Now, you've used a QR code, I'm sure. If you know who Luke Skywalker is, I'm sure you would have. So how do you actually know if a QR code is legitimate? And, when you hold your phone up to scan it?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Tony. You don't really know whether it's legitimate. And to prove the point, a man has just been arrested over in Adelaide for basically replacing QR codes at various locations, cafes, pubs, etc. He wanted to get some information out there about anti-vaxxing. So when people came along to sign in to those various establishments, they held their phone up and they were taken straight to an anti-vax site. Now, when you do that, when you hold it up to scan, you assume that the place you're going into is quite legitimate, or maybe it's a government QR code. So you think, well, this is all okay, and, well, the government must be in favour of anti-vaccination, or maybe this establishment's in favour of that. But this guy went around and just started sticking up QR codes over QR codes. So keep in mind that the difference here is that if you saw a website that said www.covidsignin.com, you'd say, okay, that looks like a COVID sign-in. If you saw www.antivax antivax.com, you'd think, oh, hold on, that must be an anti-vax site. But we can't read QR codes, and that's the problem. Computers, phones can read them very easily, very quickly, huge amount of information on them, up to about 2,500 numeric characters. So you've got all this information, but we don't really know if it's legitimate. You've actually got to use a bit of that good old-fashioned common sense, Tony, to see what's happening. But anyway, this gentleman's been arrested. He will be up for sentencing later on. It's actually quite a severe potential penalty that you'll have for effectively meddling in COVID-19 areas.
Well, Matthew, I can see all they really need to do there is label their QR code on the bottom.
Well, they could do that, but again, someone could still put something that's completely different to what the QR code is, because when we look at it, we can't read the QR code. So you could still put something that looked legitimate at the bottom, and then on the QR code you could have whatever information you wanted to.
Yes, I suppose that's true. Although you'd have to go to a bit more trouble, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's a little bit extra trouble. And again, I haven't seen an example of this happening anywhere before where people are illegitimately replacing QR codes. So maybe this will start something. Maybe this incident in Adelaide will give lots of other people ideas. And one thing that I have learned over the years, Tony, is that even though things might be a bit of trouble to go to and a bit of effort, scammers seem to be quite happy to go to all of that effort if they can see some way they can get an easy victory or a quick dollar. They seem to go to a lot of trouble.
Yes, that's very true. Now, as we drive around the region, you see more and more spinning propeller blades of wind turbines. Around Wellington you can certainly see them. And I know that there's been some more research into, what is the best way of or the most efficient way of collecting wind. So there's a few different solutions coming up, isn't there?
Yeah, and that you're right, that traditional propeller wind turbine site, we see that when we see wind turbines typically, but there's some research that's come out of Oxford Brookes University, and they found that the vertical turbine design, and if you think about that, obviously we haven't got pictures to look at, we're on radio, but instead of a propeller spinning with the axis horizontal to the ground, the vertical turbine design effectively spins with a vertical axis. So it spins literally around the actual tower that's constructed. And one of the things they found is that the efficiency of that spinning motion has increased by about 15% over a traditional wind or propeller in the same amount of wind. But the other thing that's been really impressive is that they actually work better near each other. So one of the things that happens in a traditional wind farm is that the propeller blades at the beginning get most of the wind, and then as they create a bit of turbulence, the subsequent turbines down towards the back of the wind farm reduce the amount of wind they're getting, so they reduce the amount of output. But the vertical axis wind turbines, in particular in pairs, actually spin faster when they're near each other. So you still get this excellent, I suppose, production of electricity across an entire wind farm. And when you talk about the ones, the Binjang wind farm around Wellington, they're fairly spread out. But when you see some other ones at overseas locations, in particular in straits, in ocean straits, they're often built very close together because it makes a lot of sense to put the infrastructure there close together, all the electrical cables, etc. So they're much closer together and built in an array. So these sort of vertical axis turbines are much more efficient, and I think we'll start to see these more and more as time goes on as they keep developing from, again, prototype structure to final production versions.
Yes, I can hardly wait. I wonder if they'll look any better on the landscape.
Look, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Tony. So I actually quite like the look of current wind turbines. I'm always impressed by them. Some people think they're ugly, but again, when first power poles were put up, I'm sure people used to complain about power poles, and then they realised they wanted the electricity. And then mobile phone towers were put up and people thought they were ugly, but then they wanted the mobile phone reception. So it may well be the same with wind turbines. People might think they're ugly until they realise that the power, the renewable power they're providing is quite handy.
Well, some people are blind, I reckon, underground, a lot of them. You're listening to Tech Talk on Binjang 91.5. Stick around next week for another session. And for now, it's right back to the music and all the great information on Binjang 91.5.
Thanks, Tony. We'll chat again next week.